First of all, thanks for being here. But most of us have never heard these words before. But I'm guessing we use what they are in. What is the real world effect of these metals if they're withheld?
Thanks for having me on. So these are raw materials that are essential for the semiconductor business. And as you mentioned, this is retaliation by China to the sweeping export controls that the U.S. put on the semiconductor business and on export of semiconductors to China in October. And those controls were sweeping because we had never done that to China before. And they were aimed at not just preventing the export of semiconductors to China, but making it more difficult for China to develop their own semiconductor business. But there were lots of good reasons for the U.S. to do that. Most importantly, because some of these semiconductors go into advanced weapon systems, and we don't want to help China's military catch up to us. We also don't want to help them help Russia in the war in Ukraine. So these were essential, important controls that we put in place. And now China is retaliating, but it's notably retaliating not by limiting products that are made, but actually limiting the raw materials. As you mentioned, China has the majority of these raw materials supply, but they don't have all of it. So it is possible for the U.S. still to get these raw materials from other countries.
And it seems maybe in their eyes, there's a difference between not helping and throttling. Chinese state media says this is a warning to the West. I think warning was a word they used. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think that you make a very good point. You could argue that the measures that were put in place last October were intended to really make it very difficult for China to have its own, competitive semiconductor industry, manufacturing industry. And we know that their goal by 2035 was to be the leader in manufacturing a semiconductor. And so we knocked out some of the platforms, some of the steps that they needed to get there by 2035. But I think there were strong policy reasons for the U.S. to do that in October, and it was supported. It has bipartisan support in the U.S. Most Democrats and most Republicans support these types of measures against China, especially given China's human rights record and some of the things it does with technology to its own population.
So I'm going to say the T word, which you know all too well, having worked at the State Department. Taiwan is supposedly untouchable from a U.S. perspective. We have this strategic ambiguity, but then every time he's asked directly, would you go in with a military if, China tries to take Taiwan, the president has said yes. And then they walk it back, and then he says it again. We also know that Congress passed the CHIPS Act, billions of dollars being put into things like semiconductors, and I'm guessing that whole supply chain, which I don't know if rare earth metals are in that, but maybe they ought to be. Do you think we're doing enough at this point to make sure that we have the resources we need? Because we need cars, we need drones, we need this stuff.
So the CHIPS Act is a major step in the right direction, in my view, which is the U.S. government, the U.S. Congress passed a law to provide funding for those companies that want to go into manufacturing of semiconductors. And we really needed to subsidize that industry in order to bring more of the manufacturing of the semiconductors back to the U.S. Now, we don't yet know how impactful it's going to be because companies have just started applying for funds under the CHIPS Act. But I think it's really important that we do that and other things to protect this industry, which is so important to things like military, but also to other high technology products that we make, including electrical vehicles and computers and other things that will allow us to continue to compete with China and be a leader in the world.
I see. Okay. And being the line leader, kind of messy. There seem to be one of two line leaders right now, and they both are competing. I guess I'll just ask you this before we say goodbye. Anthony Blinken was just there. Janet Yellen's there. I don't know that she's a diplomatic powerhouse, but she carries a lot of weight behind her. Right track, wrong track when it comes to U.S.-Beijing relations. We're headed on the...
Well, it's complicated. So Blinken made a historic visit to China. It had been over 5 years since someone as high up as he is in the government had been to China. So it restarted diplomacy, which is important. But he didn't accomplish all the things he wanted. Notably, one of the things he wanted to accomplish was direct communications between our military and China's military, so that there would not be any inadvertent confrontations between our militaries. That he did not get. So it's hard to tell. Will this visit go well? Well, it didn't start well with this announcement by China, but hopefully there's could be some negotiation by Yellen, and maybe China would be willing to roll this back, or at least not do further measures like this, including on rare earth minerals, which would also be difficult for us to deal with.
David Tafuri, I cannot imagine in a field like yours the amount of things that have to be considered all at one time. Super smart. Thank you.
Thank you.